see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Yeah! Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole family.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Historians of science and philosophers of science have understood for a long time, namely that theoretical preconceptions can influence how scientists look at different categories of evidence that come to their attention. So, I mean, just a and the scientists who are doing this knowledge filtering, they're not necessarily thinking, well, here's some true evidence, which, if known, would cause people to disbelieve in my theories. So therefore, I'm not going to talk about it. That kind of thing may happen. It does happen, but in many cases, the scientists involved don't recognize at all that what they're doing. A perfect case would be some discoveries that were made 3 or 4 years ago in England, footprints that were found at a place called Happisburgh. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that exactly correctly.
My listener, I have listeners all over the world, but, a base in the UK. I have a feeling, I'm going to check this as we talk, I think they might call it something like Haysburg or something like that.
Haysburg, yeah.
I think it's something like that, but I could be wrong because I'm not from that part. But yes, I know what you mean.
Happisburgh. So it's probably, as you say, Haysburg.
Well, you keep talking, I'll search. So what was the story from there?
Well, the archaeologists found footprints on some sediments near the shoreline there. And, during low tide, these rocky layers were exposed and they could see footprints on them. And they determined the formation that had the footprints was about 700,000 years old. And then they very carefully photographed and recorded the footprints. They carefully measured them, and they compared the measurements to the footprints of living populations of modern humans. They found they were within the modern human range in terms of their shape and size. They were almost exactly like living populations, the foot structure of living populations of Native American, Indians, Eskimos. They were exactly like modern human footprints. But, they were looking at them and they decided that they couldn't even imagine they'd been made by humans like us. So they just proposed, well, humans like us, Homo sapiens, we didn't exist 700,000 years ago in the UK. And there must have been some kind of ape man, some kind of hominin that existed at that time.
But when you say that time, that time is 500,000 years prior to when we thought something like that would be around. So that should have been, and the pronunciation, I've just checked it, is Haysburg. That should have been in Haysburg, something that made international news, shouldn't it?
It did make international news, but because they said, okay, these footprints are there. They're like anatomically modern human footprints, but to me, they should have said, well, that raises the possibility that humans like us have been around for a lot longer than we thought. That possibility should have been considered, but it wasn't.
That question then, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I didn't mean to jump in.
No,
but,
go ahead.
That then poses the question, if that's the case, what do we do about this? And from what you're leading up to, I think, nobody asked that question.
Yeah, nobody asked that question. Nobody considered that possibility. Another very recent example of that, in 2016, there were some archaeologists doing excavations at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania in East Africa. It's a very famous place. Many important discoveries have been made there. And these archaeologists, they found a finger bone in layers of rock 1,800,000 years old. And they very carefully measured this finger bone. They compared it to the finger bones, the same finger bone of different species of apes, a gorilla, chimpanzee, orangutan, etc., all the different species of apes and monkeys. They compared it to the different fossil hominin finger bones, the same finger bone in Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and they also compared it to anatomically modern human finger bones. And they said it falls squarely in the modern Homo sapiens group. But they said in their published report, it was published in Nature Communications, which is a very respected scientific journal. They said, essentially, this is like a modern Homo sapiens finger bone, but we can't call it Homo sapiens because of the age of the formation in which it was found. So,
that's astonishing, Michael. You mean, in other words, we're going to deny this because it goes against our paradigm?
Yeah, so they don't think they're suppressing anything. They're saying, okay, we found this finger bone. It's like that of an anatomically modern human, like Homo sapiens, but of course we can't call it that because everyone knows Homo sapiens didn't exist almost 2 million years ago. But I say, well, why not?
But that's a little bit like finding a shopping cart on Mars, taking a picture of it, and then everybody saying, no, there are no shopping carts on Mars, they can't be there, so let's just ignore that.
Yeah. There was a very interesting psychological experiment that was done. It was, it's been cited in the work of modern historians of science. But in the psychological experiment, the experimenters took a deck of cards and they changed some of the cards in the deck. For example, like they took a 6 of hearts, which would normally be red, and they made it black. And so they changed a few cards like that, and then they would show the cards to the subject of the experiment, one after another from the deck of cards, and they would ask people to identify what the card is. And, people, they would show them some of the normal cards, and then, then that black 6 of hearts would be shown to a person, and they call it 6 of spades. In other words, they're looking right at it, but they're not seeing what's in front of them. They're just refusing to recognize that they see what they're accustomed to see. So I I think the same kind of thing goes on in the world of science. Sometimes an anomaly, a fact that doesn't fit the paradigm, will be staring scientists right in the face, and they just simply cannot recognize it for what it is. Possible evidence, in this case that we're speaking about, of extreme human antiquity, the idea that humans like us must have existed a long, long time ago.
So that's that's a mountain. That's a massive hurdle to climb. You said at the beginning of a talk that I watched you give, I watched the video of it today, there are people in the scientific world who are interested in what I have to say, implying that there are a lot who are not, but there are some who are starting to latch on to the things that you said.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of interesting that in recent years, science has actually been taking tiny steps in the direction that I've been going. I think they've got a lot further to go. For example, when my book Forbidden Archaeology was published in 1993, they had the idea that humans like us were no older than about 100,000 years. By the early 2000s, they had extended it back to 200,000 years. Now, on the basis of some discoveries of some human-like skulls that were found in Morocco, they're willing to put it back to maybe 300,000 years. So I think they're taking tiny steps in the right direction. But to make this extreme leap back to millions and millions of years ago, there are a few scientists today who are willing to contemplate these things. There was this astrophysicist named Gavin Schmidt, and another scientist, another astronomer, Dr. Frank. And they put forward something called the Silurian hypothesis. So the Silurian is a geological period that goes back about 400 million years. And they got this idea that, well, maybe there was some human civilization that existed millions and millions of years ago. They had been watching an episode from an old British science fiction series called Doctor
Who. Right, okay, so Silurian, I remember at school doing geology, the Silurian period, I thought we understood that it was mostly fish and sea and oceanic creatures.
Amphibian. There were some amphibians, some simple amphibians living at the time also. But there was an episode of that series where there were some scientists that were working at a nuclear reactor, and there was some kind of earthquake or something. And so they were kind of digging below the reactor, and they found in some cavern some reptilians who had been hiding, reptilian people, intelligent reptilian sort of people that had been hiding for hundreds of millions of years, and they had an advanced technology. So these scientists today who were wondering, because of basically global warming and things like that, they were kind of interested in, well, maybe in some other planet in the solar system, we can detect signs of gases, greenhouse gases in the atmospheres of these planets. And then they thought, well, maybe we don't have to look at other planets. Maybe we can look at our own planet. And maybe there was a civilization hundreds of millions of years ago. And if there was, what signs of it would there be left today? So I think it's kind of interesting that even some modern scientists are considering this idea of extreme human antiquity, for whatever reason. I think that's fascinating.
So they would think that the missing link was something that connected us with creatures of the sea, with amphibians.
Yeah. Now, personally, I don't have any problem with humans like us existing from the very beginnings of the history of life in the universe. But yeah, that is probably what they were thinking. They were thinking, yeah, there could have been some earlier evolution of some type of creature, not necessarily Homo sapiens of our type, but that had the intelligence to make some kind of civilization, some kind of industrial, technological civilization. So, yeah.
But if that was so, Michael, there would be more signs of that, wouldn't there?
Well, that isn't what they concluded. They concluded, and this is kind of important, that over vast periods of time, we're talking about tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years, the remnants of such a civilization would not survive very easily. Because metals will oxidize, other types of things will decay. They said that whether we're talking about bones or artifacts, they would be very, very few would survive. And probably they thought the best way to detect the remains of any such civilization would be to look for chemical traces of compounds that don't naturally occur in nature, but that involve some kind of high technology to make, or signs of radioactive elements that persist for a long time. In other words, maybe there was some nuclear war in many, many millions and millions of years ago, and it would possibly leave some traces. So they were thinking more in terms of micro evidence rather than the fossil evidence, the kind we're talking about.
Right. And from what you're saying, then, do I infer that you think they're completely wrong?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're willing to consider the possibility of intelligent life with human-like intelligence, and existing hundreds of millions of years ago on this planet and in other places in the universe. I thought it was pretty interesting, this Silurian hypothesis, as they called it.
That doesn't fit Haysborough, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. But, and getting back to your question about archaeologists, basically I find there are two types of archaeologists. One I call the Archaeology group, and the other the Archaeologies group. The Archaeology group believes that there's one science of archaeology. It's objective, it's fact-based. We've got it all figured out. Maybe we have to clean up a few problems here, but basically we know the whole history of the human race, and that's it. Then there's this other group, the Archaeology's plural group, where they understand, well, we're all human, even scientists, and our ideas, our biases, our prejudices, different social factors influence our theories. They influence the kinds of evidence that we're willing to consider and things like that. So they think, okay, this Western scientific archaeology is one thing, but there may be other archaeologies based on other understandings, an Australian Aboriginal archaeology, a Native American Indian archaeology. They talk about indigenous archaeologies, or there may be a feminist archaeology, or different kinds of archaeologies. And actually, this movement, I to a large extent, began in the UK in the 1980s, and during, I think it was 1986, around that time, the World Archaeological Congress was formed in Southampton, England, and it was made up of archaeologists, many from England, but from other parts of the world also, who kind of accepted this idea that there's more than one archaeology. So it's scientists, archaeologists in that group who have accepted my proposals to present papers about my work at meetings of the World Archaeological Congress, the European Association of Archaeologists, and others. I mean, some years ago, I was invited to speak about forbidden archaeology at the Royal Institution in London. Mm-hmm. That was, trying to think what year that was, 2001. I think it was around that time. So there's been kind of some pushback against these people who have this kind of mentality, but they're still there.
Okay, so attitudes may be changing slowly, but the emerging data, the emerging information is moving things on at a pace faster than they're moving, it seems to me. For example, it's only fairly recently that people have started saying, well, the ancient Egyptians were amazing, weren't they? Which, of course, they were. And the Mayans were advanced, which they were. But it seems that, for example, with the ancient Egyptians, we now understand that there were civilizations we don't know a lot about that predated them, perhaps quite significantly. So we are moving forward, aren't we? And with discoveries like Göbekli Tepe and what's being, unearthed there by various people, things are starting to change.
Absolutely. And not just in archaeology, but I think in the world of science generally, I see so many accounts now that are taking consciousness into account in quantum physics and cosmology and astrophysics. That is a fantastic new development as far as I'm concerned. So there are a lot of different areas in which there appear to be some fundamental paradigm shifts going on.
But the big gap in all of this is, of course, the notion of For example, in Haysborough, but also that other discovery that was much older than Haysborough that you mentioned. That was the finger bone, wasn't it?
Moldova Gorge, yeah.
It doesn't tell us what sort of people they were. It doesn't tell us how they fed themselves, what technology they used, and where they might have emerged from, does it? There are lots of questions that are thrown up by all of this.
Well, and I think that's great because that's what science is. It's a process of discovery, one thing leading to another, inspiring people to dig a little bit further into it and try to recover that kind of information. So, yeah, I think that's quite a healthy thing. You do get some signs in some of the archaeological discoveries that have been made of artistic ability or some sign of what things were being used. You can analyze stone tools and things like that for the remnants of plant or animal material that may be on the edges of the stone tools, so you can tell what they were being used for, what kind of plants or animals were being processed, and from that kind of information you can get some idea of the diet of people, the level of skill that they had, and so on and so forth. So you actually can recover some of the kinds of information that you're talking about, knowledge about what the people were actually doing that can be recovered from this kind of evidence.
And what about the notion that things are turning up in strata of rock where they shouldn't be? In other words, further down than they should be.
Could AI help you do more of what you love? Workday is the AI platform for HR and finance that actually knows your business. We help you handle the have-to-dos so you can focus on the can't-wait to-dos. It's a new Workday. Meet the new iSIMS, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSIMS helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSIMS, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.
Well, that's basically what I'm dealing with in forbidden archaeology, things where they shouldn't be. Interesting case from England. In the 19th century, there was a geologist named Henry Stopes, and at a meeting for the British Association for the Advancement of Science, he presented a report about a carved shell, like a shell, a fossil shell, a couple of million years old, that had a simple but recognizable human face carved on the front of the shell, kind of like an ancient version of the smiley face, that people put in their emails sometimes. So
yes, they do.
Yeah, and it was found it was found in East Anglia at a place called Walton on
the
Naze.
Yes.
Walton on the Naze, and the Red Crag Formation there, which, according to modern geologists, is from the Pliocene period. In other words, it goes from about 2 million years to 5 million years ago. And, according to Stopes, it was found firmly embedded in that formation. It's a type of shell that dates back to the Pliocene, and it's really just a fascinating case from England, giving evidence for a human presence going back a couple of million years.
But of course, the shell might have been that old. How can we know that it was actually worked that long ago? It may have been worked a lot later.
Well, that is a very good question, and it's a question that came up at the time. So, Henry Stopes reported this in the 19th century. So in the early 20th century, these exact same questions were being raised by scientists and archaeologists and others. So Mary Stopes, who was daughter of Henry, she herself was also a geologist, she had the specimen, and she was invited to bring it to a commission of scientists, of geologists and other scientists who were going to really look at this question, specifically this question of whether the carving on it had been done after, in recent times. In other words, you take a genuine Pliocene shell from the Red Crag Formation at Walton-on-Danais, and then maybe 100 years ago, somebody carves a little face on it, puts it back, for Stopes or Henry Stopes or somebody else to find. All right. So they considered that very carefully. They looked at the staining of the shell. They looked at the hardness of the shell, that if somebody had tried to carve something into it, it would have shattered, that shell. So the commission of professional scientists, archaeologists, and geologists who considered that question decided, no, it's genuine. The carving is from the time that the shell was deposited in the formation. Of course, I lay all this out in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and I kind of leave it up to the reader to make up his or her mind. I'm not going to, if somebody considers this case and, they decide, well, interesting, but I'm not persuaded, that's their right. I respect the right of every single person to look at this evidence and come to their own conclusion. But
it's fascinating, Michael, but just to jump in here, I suppose if we were to be swayed by this, then we'd have to see a lot more examples, I think. We would see these things turning up everywhere. And are we?
I think we do. My book, Forbidden Archaeology, is about 900 pages long. In other words, we're not talking about one or two cases. We're talking about hundreds of cases like this. You could go and look at the discoveries of J. Reed Moore, who was a researcher operating in East Anglia in the early 20th century. He found stone tools and weapons in the Red Crag Formation at different places along the coast of East Anglia. Also at a place called Foxhall, he found in an excavation 16 feet deep in the Red Crag Formation many stone tools and weapons. In the 19th century at Foxhall, a human jaw it's called the Foxhole Jaw, was recovered from the Red Crag Formation there. So it's not that you just have, an isolated discovery of, one carved shell. There's a whole set of discoveries if you look at them. And as I tried to indicate, it's something that's still going on today, even though the scientists who are making the discoveries may not appreciate them for what they are.
But Michael, what's happening in your own country? Your country has deserts, your country has mountains, your country has cold places, hot places, your country has a vast expanse of territory. Are these sorts of things being found now in your country, in the US?
Absolutely, yes. There was an interesting case from San Diego, and in recent years, now this is a very interesting fact, that in recent years in the United States and in Europe and in the UK, most archaeology that's being done is not being done through the universities. There's something called contract archaeology, which, this kind of started 20 or 30 years ago, where archaeologists convince governments to, if a road was being built or houses were being constructed, by government regulation, the people who were building the road or developing the housing development, they would have to bring in archaeologists to do an inspection and make sure that nothing archaeological was being disturbed or anything. So it became a whole industry, and most archaeologists, probably about 90% of them today, are kind of working in that. And what they find really isn't getting reported. It just goes to some government file somewhere. So there were some archaeologists that were doing such work, and paleontologists, at a highway that was being made in Southern California. And they noticed there were these mammoth bones of, these extinct elephants, mastodons, mammoths, that had human cut marks on them, like the animals had been butchered. And they determined initially that the bones with these human butchering marks on them were about 300,000 years old. But the report just got buried because, first of all, nobody knew about it. It's not being reported at a scientific conference, or it's just some contract archaeological work that was being done to satisfy government regulations. So the report was filed away in the transport ministry of the California government, the highway department. But somehow somebody sent it to me. You get, what do you call these people?
Whistleblower. I was about to use that word, yeah.
So somebody got it, sent it to an archaeologist that I know who is open to these kind of things, and she sent it to me. And
well, San Diego's what, 120 miles down the coast from you? You could go there, couldn't you?
I've been there. I actually talked once with some of the scientists who are involved in these discoveries. So, and then what happened is that many years later, the scientists got together and, they redated it to about 100,000 years, which fits within the worldwide evidence for anatomically modern humans, but it's still anomalous in terms of the presence of humans in North America, because the standard idea is humans like us first entered North America maybe about 25,000 years ago, coming either by boat from Europe, or the more common idea is overland from Siberia to down through Canada, down through the United States, down into Mexico, and then into South America, all within the past 25,000 years. So to have this evidence for, the scientists reporting 100,000 years is anomalous for North America, not in terms of a human presence worldwide, but still a pretty bold thing to do for North American archaeology.
Well, understood then. So why haven't archaeologists or people interested in all of this descended on San Diego and started digging the place up to find more? Surely that's the scientific method, isn't it? If you find one thing, then you've got to start looking for evidence of other things.
Well, there were, scientists were doing things like that. For example, there's the Calico site, and it's between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. Louis Leakey, who was one of Britain's prominent archaeologists, his whole family, Louis Leakey, his wife Mary Leakey, their son Robert Leakey, the whole big famous family of archaeologists. He was the patriarch, Louis Leakey. He came to the Calico site in Southern California, where some American archaeologists had uncovered stone tools and weapons. And he said, yeah, this place is about 300,000 years old, and it's really fantastic. But his colleagues in the scientific world just thought, okay, Leakey's getting older now. He's 60 or 70 years old. He's lost his mind, gone crazy. So, people were going. A lot of work had been done in Southern California. And what to speak of the California gold mine discoveries that were made in the 19th century, where you had miners finding human bones and human artifacts and layers of rock 50 million years old. And this kind of takes us into Silurian hypothesis territory. Not 100,000 years or 200,000 or a million, but 50 million year old layers of rock. And these discoveries were reported to the scientific world by the chief government geologist of California, Dr. Whitney. But you don't hear anything about them today. So I just think if people are interested in a certain subject, they should be aware of all the discoveries that relate to that field of human inquiry. And then they can make up their mind about how to categorize all that evidence. But at least they should be aware of it, because something that doesn't fit at the present moment may become meaningful in the light of future discoveries, but only if you know it's there. If you just completely cast it into oblivion because it doesn't fit, then all right, then you're
going to miss something.
You're going to miss something.
Do you think, and this is a bit left field, but there's a lot of attention on Mars at the moment, and there are a lot of people who suggest that maybe we came from Mars, and there's certain claimed evidence for the fact, like our natural cycles match those of Mars, and all of that sort of stuff. There are 3 missions to Mars at the moment. America's Perseverance perhaps being the most sophisticated, complicated one of all, but they're going to bring back material from there. Do you think that there might be any connection with that kind of research and the sort of thing that you're doing?
I think there is, but here's something to understand. The missions to Mars that have been launched by NASA, the American Space Agency, they are actually looking for signs of life on Mars. But they are restricted by NASA regulations from looking for anything other than the most primitive forms of life. In other words, microbes, bacteria, and things like that. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I can understand that there might be a progression. Maybe they have to start with the microbes and stuff like that. I simply don't know. It just fascinates me that you think there may be a connection.
I would say if we're talking about life, human life, intelligent life, I think that's part of life. But they're kind of, at the present moment, they're restricted.
Okay. Now, if I understand I just wanted to take you here for a second. If there were forms of us around a long time ago, how come we didn't progress more quickly? How come we didn't? I mean, look at the way that we've developed in the last 100 years, in the last 200 years, as a society, as a civilization. But they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, you think. And they didn't appear to develop very much. Why didn't they develop a sophisticated civilization?
Well, I'm not so sure that they didn't. Yeah, there are different kinds of evidence about what happened in the past. One is what we can find remaining in the record of the rocks, you might say, what's written into the record of the rocks in terms of fossils and whatever. Then there's the records that are left in the accounts of ancient civilizations. And if we look at those, we may get a different picture of things. There are descriptions in the Puranas of civilizations that existed hundreds of millions of years ago, not only on this planet, but on other planets that had spacecraft. They were called vimanas in Sanskrit. There are elaborate descriptions of these craft and descriptions of cities, very well laid out cities, very big cities, very complex social organization, very good understanding of the relationships of human beings and their environment, things of that sort. So I'm not entirely convinced that our present technological civilization is the only such civilization that has ever existed. And I would point out again the scientists who are working on this Silurian hypothesis. They think we should actually be looking for such evidence, and as they pointed out, it may not be so easy to recognize, and we may have to look for other kinds of evidence than we're now searching for. So now I know that the kinds of things we're speaking about are not the current mainstream ideas. But, sometimes, it would be nice to be living at a time when one's personal convictions are widely shared among the elite groups of the society in which one lives.
But history hasn't been that way, has it? People who've been mavericks have sometimes been the ones who've made the achievements, but they've had to pay a personal price for it.
And it may be fun as well.
I guess so, being outside the tide. So look, who is doing, in your view, the most exciting, potentially revelatory work in this field at the moment? Bearing in mind the world is hamstrung by coronavirus right now. So everything's semi on hold at the moment until all of that subsides, which it inevitably at some point will. But, who's doing the exciting work? Where are you looking for developments?
Do you mean aside from myself?
Well, yeah, I was going to say apart from yourself, but I thought you'd think that was a silly thing for me to say. But apart from you, who's doing the real groundbreaking work?
I've had I like the work of people like Graham Hancock. I think has done some really interesting things. Robert Bauval from France and also England. People who are exploring different aspects of what I would call alternative history. I like the work of Robert Schoch. You mentioned Göbekli Tepe and places like that. So he's kind of looked into those things.
He works very hard at all of this. I've spoken to him many times, yeah.
Yeah, Robert Schoch, I have a lot of respect for his work. So there are a lot of people.
But when I put Robert Schoch on my show, I get a lot of people who say, "Way to go, Robert Schoch, we think you're doing some really valuable work." And I get people emailing me absolutely rubbishing him. So this is always going to be a controversial field, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. If you can't stand the heat, then don't go in the kitchen.
Yeah, I guess so.
So obviously that sort of element is there. So and then there are people within the scientific community, because I think the kinds of people I've just named, well, Robert Schoch is a little bit different. He's, say, than myself or Graham Hancock or Robert Forster and working in South America and others. So, but there are, like, one person I really respected was Virginia Steen McIntyre, who was an American geologist. And she had gone down to date an archaeological site in Mexico at a place called Huayatlaco. And, she and her colleagues used 4 different methods to date the site. They got an age of about 300,000 years. But the archaeologists refused to publish that data. They said that can't possibly be true. Humans capable of making the artifacts we found here didn't exist 300,000 years ago. So she stuck to her guns, and like you said, suffered for it, professionally. So I kind of respect people like that.
Well, sometimes you've got to go out on a limb. I know that myself in very trivial ways in my own life. Now, Michael, at the end of this then, what is it, as we speak in August 2020, on this sweltering day here in the United Kingdom and your day in Los Angeles, what is it at the moment that excites you most? What's, as we say over here, what's floating your boat right now?
Well, what I'm working on now are a few things. I'm working on a book. My working title for it is Extreme Human Antiquity, where I'm putting together all the cases that have come to my attention since my classic work, Forbidden Archaeology, was published. So I'm taking advantage of the downtime, because if things had gone according to my plan of last year, I would have been going to Prague this summer for a meeting of the World Archaeological Congress. I would have been going in September to a meeting of the European Association of Archaeologists in Budapest. I'd be presenting papers there, and you kind of get caught up in the travel and all that, and maybe because of doing things like that, I kind of get distracted from writing projects I should have been working on. So with kind of my enforced solitude and having to remain in one place, it's kind of put me in a position where I can really finish off some things that I perhaps should have finished a while ago.
Well, I look forward to that coming out, Michael, without a doubt. There are so many questions to be answered. I mean, things like, how would they, if we want to lump them together, which we can't, because it seems that we're talking about many different, peoples. But, how did they communicate? And did they record anything of their lives? All of these things have yet to be answered. So it's a very exciting field. But it's a field that's going to outlive both of us, isn't it? I mean, you're not going to get the answers that you're looking for in your lifetime or mine, it seems.
Yeah, sometimes I imagine being an archaeologist and digging up my own bones from a previous life.